Clark Luthor met Jonathan Kent at a diner in Suicide Slump. Clark asked Jonathan why couldn't they meet at the bar. Jonathan told him that Martha thought it wasn't wise to hang out at the bar now that he was sober. Clark found it funny that Jonathan was so scared of his wife. He said out loud that it was nice of him to risk getting in trouble with his wife in order to help him. Jonathan said, "You may think this is funny now, but one day you will be in love and that woman will rule your world also." Clark scoffed at this idea. Jonathan just said, "You wait and see." Clark answered since that won't be happening anytime soon, he could use Jonathan's help. Jonathan asked with what? Clark told Jonathan everything he had learned over the last couple of days about Malcolm Malone, the super weapon he was building, and the relic he found at the Luthor mansion. Jonathan said, "So it is a super weapon?" Clark responded, "Yes. And he was most likely building it on this property that Lois had found." Jonathan was surprised to hear her name. "You and Lois Lane are working together?" Clark said, "Yes. I bumped into her the last couple of times I switched places with the other Clark." Jonathan said, "Lois and Clark, huh? You guys make an interesting team." Clark answered, "She's definitely interesting. She's willing to walk into danger with only Jimmy Olsen to protect her." Jonathan laughed and asked, "So what do you need?" Clark answered that the director of astrobiology at Swan Communications didn't know what powered the weapon, but it had to be a lot of it for the weapon to be effective. Jonathan answered, "So you want to take a trip out to the property?" Clark answered, "Only if your wife says it's okay." Jonathan laughed and rolled his eyes. Clark and Jonathan went to Malcolm Malone's industrial property located just outside of Metropolis. There are a number of worn down buildings at the site. Jonathan asked where should they start. Clark used his x-ray vision to scan the buildings and found a couple he couldn't see through. That didn't bode well. Clark told Jonathan that there were a couple of the buildings that he couldn't see into. Jonathan, shocked that Clark could see through walls, asked why couldn't he. Clark said the building's walls were painted with lead. He couldn't see through lead. Jonathan said that means the weapon was definitely built for you and that they should watch out for kryptonite as a security measure. They walked through the site and stood in the shadows opposite the larger of the two buildings. It was heavily guarded. Jonathan said, "It doesn't look like they have any kryptonite weapons." Clark smiled and said, "Then I guess I'm up." Clark super speeds over to the guards and took them all out before they could react. When the last guard hits the ground, Clark turned to Jonathan and said cheekily, "I would have left one for you, but we don't have that kind of time." Jonathan walked over and joined Clark and said, "Don't forget, it was I that saved you." They laugh and go into the building. They see the weapon in the center of the room. It already has one relic inserted into it. There were 3 empty slots next to it. Clark went to take out the relic, but as he drew close to the weapon, he crumpled to the ground. Jonathan ran past Clark and took the relic out of the weapon, then bent down to help Clark from off the ground. As Clark limped away with Jonathan's support, Jonathan said, "Who's the old man now?" Clark remarked there had to be kryptonite in the machine. Jonathan said, "Sure, whatever makes you feel better." When they got outside, Jonathan handed over the relic and said, "Should we really check out the second building?" Clark said, "We have to. We need to know what the energy source is." They walk over to the building and open the door. Clark immediately dropped to his knees. Inside, there was a mountain of kryptonite.